This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. First and Last by Hilaire Belloc. Chapter 18. José María de Heredia. The French have a phrase, la beautiful du verbe, by which they would express something in the sound and in the arrangement of words which supplements whatever mere thought those words were intended to express. It is evident that no definition of this beauty can be given, but it is also evident that without it letters would not exist. How it arises we cannot explain, yet the process is familiar to us in everything we do when we are attempting to fulfill an impulse toward whatever is good. An integration not of many small things, but of an infinite series of infinitely small things, build up the perfect gesture, the perfect line, the perfect intonation, and the perfect phrase. So indeed are all things significant built up. Every tone of voice, every arrangement of landscape or of notes in music, which awake us and reveal the things beyond. But when one says that this is especially true of perfect expression, one means that sometimes, rarely, the integration achieves a steadfast and sufficient formula. The mind is satisfied rather than replete. It asks no more, and it desires to enjoy further the pleasure such completion has given. It does not attempt to prolong or develop the pleasure under which it is left. It is content to wait for a while and to return, knowing well that it has here a treasure laid up forever. All this may be expressed in two words: the classical spirit. That is, classic, of which it is true that enjoyment is sufficient when it is terminated, and that in the enjoyment of it an entity is revealed. When men propose to bequeath to their fellows work of so supreme a kind, it is to be noticed that they choose by instinct a certain material. It has been said that the material in which he works affects the achievement of the artist. It is truer to say that it helps him. A man designing a sculpture in marble knows very well what he is about to do. A man attempting the exact and restrained rendering of a tragedy upon the stage does not choose the stage as one among many methods. He is drawn to it. He needs it. The audience, the light, the evening, the very slope of the boards, all minister to his efforts. And so a man determined to produce the greatest things in verse takes up by nature exact and thoughtful words, and finds that their rhythm, their combination, and their sound turn under his hand to something greater than he himself at first intended. He becomes a creator, and his name is linked with the name of a masterpiece. The material in which he has worked is hard. The price he has paid is an exceeding effect. The reward he has earned is permanence. José de Heredia was an artist of this kind. The mass of the verse he produced, or rather published, was small. It might have been very large. It is not, as a foolish modern affectation will sometimes pretend, necessary to the endurance or even the excellence of work that it should be the product of exceptional moments. Nor is it even true, as the wise ancients believed, that great lengths of time must always mature it. But the small volume of Heredia's legacy to European letters does argue this, at least in the poet, that he passionately loved perfection, and that finding himself able to achieve it, for perfection can be achieved, but now and then he chose only to be remembered by the contentment which, now and then, his own genius had given him. He worked upon verse as men work upon the harder metals. All that he did was chiseled very finely, then sawn to an exact configuration, and at last inlaid. For when he published his completed volume, it is true to say that every piece fitted in with the sound of one before and of one after. He was careful in the heroic degree. His blood and descent are worthy of notice. He was a Spaniard, inheriting from the first conquerors of the New World. Nor was it remarkable to those who have received the proper enthusiasm for the classical spirit that the energy and even the violence natural to such a lineage should express themselves in the coldest and the most exalted form, when for the second time a member of the family attempted verse. It is in the essence of that spirit that it alone can dare to be disciplined. It never doubts the motive power that will impel it. It is afraid, if anything, of an excess of power, and consciously imposes upon itself the limits which give it form. Heredia in his person expressed the activity which impelled him, for he was strong, brown, erect, a rapid walker, and a man whose voice was perpetually modulated in resonant and powerful tones. In his last years, during his administration of the library of the Arsenal, this vitality of his took on an aspect of good nature, very charming and very fruitful. His organization of the place was thorough, his knowledge of the readers intimate. He refused the manuscripts of none. He advised, laughed, and consoled. His criticism was sure. Several, notably Marcel Prévost, were launched by his authority. The same deep security of literary judgment which had permitted him to chastise and to perfect his impeccable sonnets into their final form permitted him also to hold up before his eyes, grasp and judge the work of every other man. His frailty, as must always be the frailty of such men, was fastidiousness. The same sensitive consciousness which is said to have all but lost us the Aeneid, and which certainly all but lost us the Apologia, dominated his otherwise vigorous soul. It is more than 40 years since his first verse, written just upon achieving his majority, appeared in the old Revue de Paris and in the Revue du Monde. It was not until 1893 that he collected in one volume the scattered sonnets of his youth and middle age. The collection won him somewhat tardily his chair in the Academy. There is irony in the reminiscence that the man he defeated in that election was Zola. All the great men who saluted his advent are dead. Théophile Gautier, who first established his fame, Hugo, who addressed to him perhaps that vigorous appeal in which strict labour is deified, and the medal and the marble bust are shown to outlive the greatest glories, are sometimes quoted as the last among the great French writers. The immediate future will show that the stream of French excellence in this department, as in any other of human activity, is full, deep, and steady. The work of Heredia will help to prove it. He was a Spaniard, and a colonial Spaniard. No other nation, perhaps except the modern French, so inherit the romantic appetite of the later Roman Empire as to be able to mould and absorb every exterior element of excellence. It is remarkable that at the same moment Paris contemplated the funeral of the Italian de Brazza and the death of the Cuban Heredia. It is probable that those of us who are still young will live to see either name at the head of a new tradition. Heredia proved it was possible not so much to imitate as to recapture the secure tradition of an older time. Perhaps the truest generalization that can be made with regard to the French people is to say that they, especially in Western Europe, whose quality it is ever to transform itself but never to die, discover new springs of vitality after every period of defeat and aridity which they are compelled to cross. Heredia will prove in the near future a capital example of this power. He will increase silently in reputation until we, in old age, shall be surprised to find our sons and grandsons taking him for granted and speaking of him as one speaks of the majors or of the permanent lights of poetry. The end of chapter 18.